Here we go. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our first leadership series webinar as part of the Ernestine McClendon Talent Grant, cohort number 2. I'm Alison Daly. I'm the founder and CEO of Recruiting Innovation and the proud host for the Ernestine McClendon Talent Grant. And today I couldn't be more excited to introduce you all to one of my favorite people in the talent space, Anthony Lewis. Anthony is, I first met him, or I saw him speak at on a webinar with the All Raise group, which is a group that's focused on helping female founders to scale their organizations. And he was interviewed about his outcomes-based hiring approach. Anthony, we're going to hear all about his career and how he got where he is today. But right now his focus has been working with early stage startups that are starting to scale, and he's helping them to think through the talent and recruiting process as a structural system that, when designed optimally, not only helps companies scale at speed, but it helps them do that with a strong built-in structure toward diversity, inclusion, equity. And so that, you know, as we all know in growth, at speed, if you're off an inch, you're off a mile super fast. And so for him to be doing this work early with these organizations means that they're building correctly the first time, and then they're not having to go back and try to tack on some of these DEI strategies later. So we will learn more about that. But I've been enjoying seeing you almost every few weeks, Anthony, the last couple of months.
Yeah,
so.
Hopefully you're not getting tired of me. Hopefully you're not.
No, I mean, let's do this on a monthly basis, honestly.
Yeah.
So without further ado, Anthony, please tell us about yourself. We'd love to hear kind of, you know, what's your origin story into the talent space, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. This is always fun doing this with you, Allison. It never feels like a webinar or a thing. It's always conversational. I feel like we're in a podcast. I'm just missing my mic and, you know, my headset.
That's it.
But just to kind of give everyone a quick TLDR, I grew up in agency recruiting, and I'm interested, as I kind of give a quick intro, everyone, if you want to throw in kind of maybe your background, just so I kind of orient myself and make sure this talk is as tailored as possible. Just love to see where you guys are coming from. But, you know, I grew up in agency recruiting, where I was banging the phone 120, 130 times a day, right? And I was partnering with, I believe it was most of the mid-tier hedge funds and private equity funds in the greater New York City area. So very niche. And that's where I got my first kind of, you know, foray into the recruiting world. Is very interesting, very fast paced. And what I realized I was missing is I didn't have a great scope into what a strong talent program looked like, right? It was very transactional. And so, you know, after kind of, you know, really doing kind of sales recruiting, I moved into a startup because I always had the entrepreneurial bug. Nice teacher at college admission recruiting. That's awesome. But for me, I wanted to understand, what does it take to create a strong talent program, right? Operationally. And so I moved into Freshly, which, you know, some of you may or may not be aware of. They just sold to Nestle for a good chunk of coin. And so joined when they were very nascent. We helped build that out to, you know, I think 2, 3, or maybe 500 people actually by the time I left, right after their Series A. And that was a lot of fun. And I helped and learned, you know, what a strong talent operations program looks like, you know, from sourcing strategy and role design all the way through reference checks, onboarding, et cetera. And one thing, and you'll learn, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but just kind of you learn what good recruiting looks like when you get a huge, you know, full scope into what the talent experience looks like post recruitment. And because all you're doing is moving backwards and working backward. And oftentimes the candidate experience, I'll tell you, is a window into, you know, or the recruiting, the candidate experience is a window into the employee experience, and how you often treat candidates throughout that candidate or recruiting process is a huge representation of culture. And so I learned how to do that, and that was exciting. But I missed the diversity of working with, you know, a myriad of different organizations. I missed a roller coaster of building something from the ground up. And I don't want to get ahead. One of your questions was kind of what was that? I think that junction point, almost paraphrasing, but I'm with Beacon Talent now, where we are, to Allison's point, we call ourselves a talent consultancy. And so if you can imagine the McKinsey or PwCs of the recruiting world. And so we work with high growth organizations from the ground up to not only do a lot of the tactical sourcing, recruiting, from phone screen to coordination to reference checks. We also partner with the executive team and help them design a very robust, a very objective talent process or recruiting process, which includes, and we'll talk more about, scorecards, outcomes-based hiring, which helps teams move away from the heuristics and kind of I got an eye for talent, right? Talent is a data collection problem. It's a marketing problem. It's a sales problem. It's not something you try to solve just leaning on heuristics, right? That's how we got to where we are today, right? In this very lopsided world. And so we help teams move away from that thumb in the air feel and take them down a much more evidence-based track for recruiting. We do that very strategically. And so super excited to talk more about that.
Okay, so you started on the agency side, moved into Freshly, and then went on to Beacon. Is that the right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
goose
So
step.
agency, startup, talent consultancy.
Oh my
So I've
gosh.
seen,
Okay.
I've seen it from all different window panes.
And you're making a good point about the candidate experience is a good indicator for what the employee experience is going to be like. And so
Yeah,
I'm always telling candidates, interviews go both ways.
exactly.
You're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. Can you talk to us about what that was like going, first days at an agency? Talk to us about the agency experience. Like, what did
Yeah.
you gain from it? What made you want to leave?
Yeah. No, I honestly, like, all in all, I'd say it was very good foundational experience. It it was more sales than recruiting, because when you look at the actual job description, my role was, I started out as a sourcer, and so sourcing candidates, cold calling candidates, and then moved into an associate and then director role where I was managing client relationships. And that's where I got kind of the bug, where I was like, well, why isn't this working? Why aren't these folks getting hired? And I think that's what attracted me to, well, I want to see more. But I think the experience I got from agency that was really, really helpful, and I would never turn anyone away from agency. It just wasn't forever for me because it served its purpose at the time. But what I got out of it is a lot of the soft skills you need, and you all probably realize as a recruiter. It's the persistence, is the consistency, it's the tenacity. And it was great that I did it early in my career, because I built a very, very strong foundation for moving quickly and helping to translate that sense of urgency to our stakeholders. And as you all will, or probably are already realizing, your stakeholders are your internal hiring managers. And while I moved away from agency because it was very transactional, what I kept was, I need to take a consultative approach to internal hiring. I need to help translate sense of urgency to, hey, listen, if we don't move now, this candidate's going to be off the market tomorrow, right? That is what agency taught me. Where it served its purpose is, again, the scope. Agency, one, the model, I don't think is where we're going from a talent workforce perspective. Paying a success fee or contingency fee per, I give you a candidate, you give me money. I don't think we're heading there anymore. What's amazing about Beacon, I'll fast forward just a little bit, is that it's a partnership approach, right? We partner with these organizations not only to, provide them qualified candidates, but we help provide additional lift, right? And so I think I wanted to work a lot more intimately with hiring teams to see what made them tick and how to do that. And I didn't get that from agency.
No, and that's a natural progression. My first job in staffing was also a staffing firm. I'd applied to some job posting through their, channels, and I got a job in, and it's sort of like, this is even a job. I don't, most people don't realize that recruiting is is an option as a career.
Right.
And I want to hear more about Freshly, because high growth startups are exciting. I've done my time there as well. Christopher mentioned he's in a high growth
Series
startup
A,
right now.
yeah.
Yeah. What was it like to suddenly be embedded and then drinking from the fire hose and having 5 departments and managers that can come to your desk and say, where
Yeah.
are my candidates? That's totally a different experience when your hiring manager is literally your colleague you see at lunch and they're like,
Yeah. Right. Whereas, so I'll say a few things, and I think if I wouldn't change my career trajectory, I'm very happy in I'm very happy with the order of operations, right? I'm very happy with agency, high growth startup, consultancy, because when I was when I was an agency, when you think about it, I am managing a multitude of relationships. There is constant pressure. If I don't close this deal, I don't eat, right? So there is that there. I think it translated extremely well when I entered Freshly, because now you have the same environment, not as transactional, but the pressures are there because we have growth goals. We've taken outside money. We are moving quickly. I'm navigating different personalities, to say the least. And no, that is no, I'd say that's not unique to Freshly or even high growth organizations, as Chris could probably attest to. That is the pressure. You're in a pressure cooker. And it's not for everyone. But what that was like was basically like building an airplane in midair, right? The whole saying. It is, we're building processes we don't have, to reach goals that we're moving towards. And what I did, and for anyone who's in this situation now, I would say you are tested the most in what you can get, how you can get the most out of this experience in a typical high growth organization is you want to start to move away from recruiter, and folks will need to start seeing you as a partner, right? Just like we have HR business partners, you need to become a talent partner. And that's what I act as now. And it's almost the difference between a product manager and a product owner, right? All companies have product managers, but product owner is less of a functional title and more of a hat you wear, right? Scrum, master is a hat you wear, right? I became a talent partner. I knew the business model in and out. I knew the market in and out. I knew our competitors in and out. And I actually played, a strategic role in organizational design, right? Move away from being an order taker. If someone says, I need this role, don't go on, I think we think very transactionally as recruiters and say, I'm gonna go on LinkedIn, I'm gonna spray and pray. I moved away from that and said, well, why do you need this role? When I look at our headcount, we have this, and this is very high level, right? We have this, and this. This role is doing some of this. This OKR is actually less of a priority, I'm realizing now. So we don't need this until Q3. This role, actually, we probably need to split this role into two different roles, right? So you want to start thinking a bit more strategically. And our jobs as talent partners, and not just recruiters, because recruiting is one part of your job.
That's right.
Being a talent partner means, okay, what does the headcount plan look like? Why? If I'm not seeing this specific, I'll give you a quick example. There have been times where, we're recruiting for certain roles that were very small market, or the market was extremely, expensive, right? And so I had to help hiring managers move away from that persona and say, this persona is extremely expensive. This is not the only persona that can do this job, right? So let's do this. Let's understand what the goals are for this role and start to look at the map. And I did very light market mapping. And I can talk more about that if you guys have questions. And I said, okay, there are 300 people that look like this, 500 people look like this, 1,200 people look like this. I've talked to these two different personas. I've talked to 5 of them. These 2 are over budget. This person doesn't have this skill, but I don't think it's a need to have. So that's another thing we need to learn to do as a talent partner, is start to talk to your hiring managers about trade-offs. What are the trade-offs you're willing to make to get to the goal you need to do? And these folks make trade-offs every day in product, in business, in technology. They need to know how to make trade-offs. And when it comes to recruiting, because it's not as transactional and it's not as binary or as folks who don't think or don't understand what it is. And so I would say that's the second point. And the third point I would say is not like, I would say kind of, hopefully this is not contradictory, but have empathy for these folks, right? It's very easy to say, like, I remember we were in Freshly and I won't name folks, but it's fun to get together and be like, oh, like this hiring manager is annoying or this hiring manager, but right. And it gets to that diatribe. And now you have this little, and I did a little bit with Beacon, right? I'm not going to lie, because it's very easy to do that because you do that in agency. And I think that's one of the bad habits that translate. But over time, as I matured as a talent partner, I said, if I want them to see me as a partner, I need to start putting myself in their shoes, excuse me. And I need to understand. And if I say, okay, I know what they want, but I need to translate it, let me talk their language. And that's why it's so important to understand the business. And so that's why I always say, understand the business model, understand what the company does, understand what the function does, right? You know, if you're doing engineering recruiting, if you're a technical recruiter, if you're a marketing recruiter, don't just spray and pray, dig deep and say, and understand what ticks them off, right? Understand that, you know, Java developers, you know, hate .NET, or React folks probably are moving away from Vue, right? And understand these different frameworks. You need to understand what these roles actually do, because we are moving away from the spray and pray transactional recruiter. Recruiters need to have stake in the business. So if I could, you know, say that all in summation without running over, because Allison
There's no running over,
right.
go for it.
I
Yeah.
can say, one, know the business as much as your stakeholders, maybe even more. Two, teach your hiring managers, because being a talent partner is about coaching and educating. So teach them about trade-offs. Three, have empathy. So I would say those are the three things I got, and I was able to translate into my time at Freshly.
That is awesome. I mean, the whole empathy thing, yeah, it's something that you pick up when you are more on the internal recruiting side, because it is your colleague and it's your company and, you know, that your team that you're helping to build. And I also think that we can, especially on the hiring manager side, but also in recruiting, you still see it. People just kind of get stuck in, this is the way we do it. Here's a job description.
Right.
I copied and pasted it from this other one from 2 years ago. And like,
Right.
oh, you know, and that's, it's the, without going deeper first and like grounding, okay, let's just actually investigate this thought a little bit. Why do you need this? What are the skills? And kind of moving them toward what are the outcomes, and therefore what can we do trade-offs on? I mean, I think every hiring manager, they might come across as they think they know what they're talking about, but
Exactly.
really they're looking for you to come to them and say, hey, let's actually think about this. I am the expert. I'm looking at the market. This is, maybe we can think about this in a different way. I've never had a hiring manager say, I don't appreciate you thinking harder about my role, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
And they just need a guide to help them get that. Is that sort of how the beginning of the outcomes-based hiring transition happened for you?
Exactly. That's exactly. And you set that up really well, because that is what outcome-based hiring is. And
Okay, define that for our group. Yes.
yeah, so outcome-based hiring for the group here. So if any of you are familiar with and this is, I'll actually say this, before agency, I didn't even think there were frameworks, right, for hiring. I didn't even think there were best practices, right? Like I just
Best practice is a button seat, you know?
button seat. That's what, you know, it was. And I think that was, again, we're moving away from that. And I think that when I started realizing that there was some method to the madness, that's when I became a better recruiter, better talent partner. So outcomes-based hiring is something that evolved from some methodologies we've picked up over time. And so if any of you are familiar with WHO, that's WHO methodology, which is a recruiting methodology started by, I want to say Brad Street or Brad Smart or Jeff Smart, I forget his name. And that's something that it is essentially a screening guide or framework that you use, because we think about the interview process as a data collection process, right? It's not as much as a getting to know you process. I've heard, hiring managers come to me and say, I had an hour conversation with him, but like, or her, and I didn't really get to know him. I don't know if I like him. Well, you could spend a day with someone and still not know them, right? That is less of the point. Your job is to get together, or as a talent partner, is to facilitate a conversation. So just to kind of put it together, we start with a scorecard, right, which aligns the interview team on what the outcomes are for their role, right, based on organizational priorities, departmental priorities, right, versus a job description. A job description, I believe, is where a lot of the seeds of bias live. I want to Harvard graduate in, nice sounding language. You're right. You paint this picture already, but that's where bias lives. So we don't start with that. We say, okay, first of all, what does this person need to get done the first quarter, second quarter, first year, next 5 years, etc. Then we translate those outcomes into competencies. And if all you're familiar with behavioral-based questioning and situational-based questioning, there's data and studies on which are more effective and in what situation, but I could probably add that later. But what competencies do is it aligns us on the right persona, right? And so we don't use things like schooling. We don't use any of those heuristics or proxies that discriminate against, a huge pool of folks, right? What we do is say, okay, these are the technical requirements that I need to have. This person can't get these outcomes done without this. This is the persona. These are the behavioral competencies. They have a high level intellectual curiosity. They need to be really proactive. They need these competencies. And what we do is start to draft the job description from there. And then we align the interview panel to say, okay, this is what the competencies are. We're going to assign focus areas for each interviewer and saying, at the end of the day, this is a focus area you need to get information on, right? You don't go in and kind of, have an unstructured, inconsistent conversation. You don't come out and say, I liked her or didn't like her, right? What we do is we don't compare or benchmark candidates to each other. We compare them or benchmark them to the scorecard. And that scorecard is your source of truth. The scorecard tells you whether someone is aligned or not. And if someone is disqualified, we need to frame it in terms of the scorecard and see where the misalignment is. And we either update the scorecard or we make a case to push the candidate through. What we never do is we don't keep folks warm. And hiring managers love, and it's something that it's one of the things you have to get comfortable with. At the end of the day, the scorecards creates a baseline where either this person makes sense or they don't, right? There's no keeping them warm for days, for weeks, for months. I've had that happen, right? So I'll give you another example. We had to recently, or a hiring manager suggested I keep a finalist candidate warm, right? What I said was, well, if they made it through the process this far, and we have an X amount of confidence they could do the job, let's isolate where our concerns are, and we'll do an additional screen. And that way we can continue to collect data on this candidate. And from there, in that final screen, we either disqualify them or we hire them. There's no more keeping warm. Because at that point, you should have collected all the information and perspectives that you need to make it go forward or no go forward decision. That is structured interview. That is outcomes-based hiring. And it all revolves around aligning the right hiring managers or stakeholders around the focus areas or competencies that you need to understand in terms of whether this person can do the role or not.
That's excellent. And then how, when it comes to the competencies and the scorecards, are people doing that like on a 1 to 5? How are they actually scoring? Because I mean, how are you removing sort of personal opinion from an outcome that they're trying to assess?
That's a great question. And so I'll say this, there aren't any bad competencies, right? Like you'll never see someone saying like, I'm really looking for someone who's like not a team player, right? Like there's, all it is orientation, right? It is there's too much information and too much ambiguity in the interviewing process. That's what leads to gray area. That what leads to us keeping them warm. All you're doing as a talent partner is helping focus and create orientation around what we are looking for. And if you want to call it intellectual curiosity, if you want to call it proactivity, that is information you need to get from the stakeholders. And we do this, Allison, in a kickoff meeting. We get all the interview panel together, right? And we say, okay, what are the goals, what are the outcomes, all that. And then from there, as a talent partner, your job, and this is where the role of the recruiter or talent partner is changing, right? You now need to learn how to synthesize information. You now need to understand how to translate what people are saying in real time during that meeting and translate it into competencies and say, we need someone who, doesn't, who can lead a team, someone who's going to be really excited, someone, okay, cool. You're looking for proactivity. We're looking for someone who could come in and figure it out. We don't have all the bells and whistles. We're kind of building this thing as we go. Okay, intellectual curiosity, right? Your job is, as a recruiter, funny enough, is to create clarity around an otherwise very ambiguous process. That is literally the job of a recruiter nowadays. And once you can create that clarity, because we as recruiters, almost to your point, Allison, we unfortunately sometimes assume that they know best, that the hiring manager is an expert. We're the experts. We're the experts. We just don't know it yet. And so your job is to take all the things that they're thinking and create a clear roadmap to success. That is how you become a partner. And in terms of, I want to get to your question, Allison, the 1 to 5 thing, I've seen that done. You can definitely do that. You can say, you can make it more binary and say, need to have an, or, must haves or nice to haves, right? Out of these 5 skills, these 3 are must haves, these 3 are nice to haves, right? Or 1 to 5, these 3 are 4s and these 3 are 3s, because to Allison's point, not each competency is weighted the same, right? That's where you have to guide and coach folks on trade-offs. If they have this thing and we know it's a 5, we know we need to get that. That is essentially a need to have. But if this is a 3 out of 5, we can make that trade-off. So that's another thing. Not all these competencies are weighted equally. But that's a great question, Allison.
Okay, and we've got, so I have a follow-up question, then we have another one from Tariq as well. So I'm just thinking through, I'm really like process driven. So you're in the kickoff, you're taking the notes, and this is where I pull from my UX research days, because we are researchers, we are sociologists, and we're watching people in their habitats, like having their professional, opinions and like sharing with us, right? And we're just starting to pick the themes. This thing got mentioned 4 times, this thing got mentioned 3 times. So you go back to your desk, right? And you're like, okay. And then you come back and say, from what I hear, these 4 things are musts, these 3 things are a bonus. Are we all good here? And then the process would be, then you go back and say, okay, job description, you need to be able to do these things.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so we say, and now you come to the job description. And I think when we think about the role, right, of a talent partner, right, you are, to Allison's point, you are a researcher to a certain degree. You are a salesperson when you need to be, right? Because when we have late stage candidates, at the end of the day, we can't ignore the metric that, the fact that we need to bring candidates across the finish line, right? Not transactionally, the experience is very important. At the end of the day, like for example, I do employ some of those tools in my toolbox. If I have a late stage candidate, I try to get them out their own way. And so I'll create that sense of urgency and say, hey, the team's excited about you. And I'll take what they are excited about. And this is a little bit tangential, but I want to run on this thread. I take what they're excited about and I reiterate it. When we first talked, you said you were looking for this, this, this. Well, this role is this, this, this. We have a few finalists behind you. I definitely think this is a great opportunity for you, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is you have to wear these different hats at different times of the process. Where you wear this hat when you're creating the JD is you're wearing more of that scorecarding hat or a marketing hat, where you're taking what is ambiguous and fluffy, and you're turning it into a piece of advertisement. And I think there are a number of different ways we do this, or you can do this. but we like to create some kind of template where it's boilerplate on the organization. And I hope I'm answering your question, Allison, but there's boilerplate on the organization, high level, that's the sell on the company. What folks don't understand is that you have to sell the department as well, right? Especially Chris probably knows again when it comes to technical hiring, because a lot of the time people are, this is why the company is great. This is again where you have these relationships directly with the hiring manager. You need to understand why that team in that company is great. What is the selling point for the team? What is the selling point for the department? What is the selling point for that piece of the organization, that function? Did they just spin out a new, HubSpot instance? Is it a lean team? Does the CEO value marketing more than other organizations? So there's boilerplate, team or org sell, and then you sell the role. Then you go into the outcomes. And I don't always put the outcomes in the job description. Sometimes I do. I've gotten really great feedback from candidates saying, this is a really well-written job description, because to Allison's point, it wasn't some copy and pasted Frankenstein job description that sounds and looks like everything else. I actually read the job description and saw myself in the role. I actually know what I need to do in this role. So I don't always, again, put the outcomes, but they're nice to have in there for candidates. And then finally, I always put the persona. I always put, and you folks probably see this, right? I actually put in intellectual curiosity. And I say, we're looking for someone who, has a high degree of curiosity and can drive things. I say, if we're looking for someone who's highly empathetic, I'd say we are looking for someone with a PhD in emotional intelligence, right? Like, this is where our copywriting comes in. This is where you have to understand being a talent partner means wearing different hats. Being a recruiter is one of those hats.
That is a very good point, because it is a full life cycle. And then if you're an internal, then you have the whole retention side of things, not just recruiting.
Exactly.
Coming back to the scorecard, good question here from Tariq. He's asking if all the candidates are kind of equal based on the scorecard, how do the hiring committees then make their final decision on who gets selected? And what kind of becomes then the deciding factor between two candidates who scored great? And it's sort of like, okay, which one do we pick? How do you guide your teams at that stage?
That's a great question. And I would say it's this. The scorecard is a lot of the role. This is why you still need to debrief with your hiring managers, right? And for all you who are struggling to get your interview teams to fill out feedback in the ATS, this is where you want to build that muscle, right? Because after every late stage interview process, I put time on the calendar, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and we go over the candidates. Because at the end of the day, think about it as this way. If we spent all this time getting to later stages to interview this candidate, we've invested so much time in them. If we lose this candidate, that is where most of the work is, right? That is where, I forget what the saying, that is the sweetest part of the fruit, right? Like, that's where you want to get. And so what I usually say when we see two alike candidates, I actually try to teach or educate hiring teams that many candidates are alike, but all candidates are unique. There is no, unless you are interviewing twins, and I'm kidding, half kidding, right? Like, there is going to be something different, because these are people, and that's where you don't want to get too transactional. And so that's where I think debriefing on the candidates creates context that's necessary for the team. Because when you get together and everyone talks through the feedback, respective of their focus areas, you get different perspectives, right? And so people interpret things differently. And so we talk through the feedback and say, okay, what is the difference here now, right? And that's when you go to the table stake stuff. Is it geography? Is it this person will take probably a little bit longer to ramp up? Is it, quite frankly, this person's actively interviewing and we need to move quicker or not, right? Once you cross off all those high stakes data points, that's when you get to the table stakes data points. And I'll say this too. People usually, in the spirit of comparing candidates together, say, if we can't get this person, we'll hire this one. Well, that's not always the case. I've left debrief meetings where we're a yes on all three candidates, right? Just because you say yes to one candidate doesn't mean you say no to one candidate. Because then again, you can hire someone in the next few months, next quarter, next year. You could build that relationship. All it is would I hire this person for this role? And the hiring manager needs to leave that meeting with some kind of perspective. At the end of the day, it may be up to the hiring manager. All you're doing is presenting the right stakeholders with the information from the panel that they need to make a decision. That's all you're
Right.
doing. And so you can leave the panel with 2 yeses, or you can leave the panel with all 3 nos. And we need to calibrate backwards and understand why. So
What's part of your process? I understand with the outcomes-based hiring approach that we're looking at outcomes to sort of level the playing field on people's abilities. We've got a couple questions in the around the space of like, how do you help folks to not have bias? I mean, bias in their feedback. I mean, is
yeah.
by being outcomes oriented rather than like where you came from inherently do that, or do you train them ahead of time, or like what are
So
some best practices around that?
So I hate to say that it is both an art and a science, right? There is actual research behind bias. And I think the first thing you need to do as a talent partner is start to recognize that. Like, and I had to do research, right? Bias, all it is, I think we're in an environment where bias typically and very understandingly has a negative connotation because bias is a shortcut for decision making. And oftentimes, if unchecked, a bias will create, lack of diversity. It will create, exclusion, right? But what you need to do, and I can share this, is there are tons of different kinds of biases that mean different things, right? There is, parity bias. There is referral bias, right? There are different kinds of bias. And once you orient yourself around these and give them operational definitions, you can then arm yourself to the conversation, right? Because no one wants to hear that they're biased. But what you can say is this feedback is bias,
Hmm.
right? I think those are 2 different things. And so what I would say to answer that question is you have to build that muscle and start to isolate those biases in real time, right? You have to almost decode it. So if someone says, I don't know, like they may be a little bit, a bit too senior or, to hustle, or they're a bit too seasoned to hustle. That's a form of bias that is rooted in ageism, right? But when you can say is, okay, well, let's look at their experiences, let's look at the feedback, and let's compare it to the scorecard, right? Because that their inability or ability, rather, to hustle or not hustle may be rooted in something else, right? Sometimes, frustratingly enough, I don't want to make it seem that people's heuristics are always wrong. We can't rely all on heuristics. Sometimes people are right for the wrong reasons. And I want to decode that, right? Sometimes people are right for the wrong reason, meaning the feedback itself is biased. But oftentimes, if we trace back the feedback on that candidate, we realize that, oh, well, I don't think that their ability to hustle is rooted to their age. It's rooted to their experience, right? And say, well, if we look back at their experience, they never met their quotas or they never met their sales goals, right? That's the reason. We can't use this feedback though, right? You have to learn how to make feedback null and void, right? And I think that's what you can do to help de-bias. I think there is an entirely different kind of training, right? That you can do. But when it comes to recruiting and helping remove bias in real time, it always goes back to the feedback. And so if you're not collecting feedback, you can't help remove bias.
And I got to imagine that there's some element too of after a few debriefs with certain people, you might start to pick up on themes. And
Exactly.
you'd mentioned this before. It's a sales tactic in terms of what are your priorities, what are your yeses before we go anywhere. Having the outcomes based, competencies based approach plus the scorecard we are getting the hiring team and the interview team on the hook for what makes a yes. So that when that, someone comes in and it maybe isn't in their head matching what they had visualized,
Yeah.
we can come back and say, hey, you said these things were yeses. What stop, trying to avoid the moving goalposts for our candidates. And, have you seen that that's been a helpful benefit, taking the outcomes-based approach?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Alison. Because what you do now is you have a calibration log. If the goalposts move a few times, I make note of that because I actively update the scorecard. And so over a 50-day search, 60-day search, 90-day search, I can go back and say, we've moved the goalposts on day 5, day 15, and day 46. Right? Because I think the last thing, not the last thing, but I think something I want to say that'll help provide perspective is it goes back to the empathy. And empathy doesn't just mean, again, order taking, right? That is not what I'm talking about. Sometimes you're going to have to say no. Sometimes you're going to have to push back, right? I think that as recruiters, again, especially out of agency, I was very used to pleasing clients. I was what do you want? Who do you want? Okay, yeah, for sure. I push back, right? Because your job, and I am, I have less visibility into the environments and culture you're in, right? But hopefully you're in an environment where it is safe to push back and that the customer is not always right. And that I've been in environments where I had to push back and say, this person meets the bar, we need to move through. Or no, we are not fast tracking them because that is not consistent with what we've been doing. We're not doing that. Or this person is going to take an offer. We can't continue to keep them warm. We need to move or DQ them. I'm letting them know that tomorrow. What do we want to do? So you're not always going to be anyone's friend. And I think there may, as you continue to grow comfortable with that, there needs to be some personal development there, right? Where you're like, okay, it's not my job to be everyone's friend. It's my job to get things done. And at the end of the day, no one, if you're getting things done, you're, recording, you're getting the right people in the right seats, you're making sure that the candidate experience is amazing, that, everything is moving seamlessly. No one's going to remember a day that they didn't like you for something, right? No one's going to remember when you, right? Actually, the right people will look back and thank you for it. And so I think we all need to, there's some growing and comfort with discomfort that we need to get into as talent partners.
Big time. And one thing I want to add too on the scorecard idea, and this is something I've proposed, is as an organization, and this is a long running conversation with most organizations, but if adding diverse experience, diverse perspectives, diverse people onto the team is a goal, you can add a line on the scorecard that says, does this person add something new or different in terms of experience or skills that we don't have already on the team?
Exactly.
If that's a yes, they get extra points, so that when you do have two candidates that have all the competencies that do meet the persona that we're looking for, and one of them looks like 80% of the team and one of them doesn't, the one that doesn't inherently is the better fit because they get more points
based on the expectations that you as a talent partner, Alison, has set.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. We're going more into the sort of the deeper side of the bias section. We have one more question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
When it comes, you mentioned this, bias is a decision process. Like it's not inherently bad, but it can be leveraged, for negative ways if it's sort of unconscious. Like how do you work with teams? Like, do they know that they're biased? Like, how do you start getting this conversation going so that people don't feel like, they get a little prickly, but at the same time, we're at a stage in the market and as an industry that we have to have these tough conversations. We got to have some real talk scenarios. Like,
absolutely.
How do you guide people to say some bias is some bias good? Is some bias bad? Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
That's you're not making this easy, Alison.
It's a hairy subject, I know.
I don't want to So I'll preface this. I'll cheat a little bit. I don't think I can give you an answer that will help. There's no linchpin, right? I don't think I can answer this, and you guys will go back and wave a wand and solve for this.
Right.
It's a muscle. It is something you have to work at and work at and work at. So I'll preface my answer with that. I'm always happy to chat with anyone offline. Um, but what I can say to get as close to the bullseye as possible is it's about setting expectations. Our fifth or nth job as a talent partner, and we have this saying, it's a value of ours internally at Beacon, is set expectations early and often. The longer version of that is to get to the bedrock of every issue. But TLDR, set expectations very early and very often, right? I've learned over my career that you don't wait until day 40 to say this is a problem in the search. You say on day one, hey, right off the bat, we're going to run into this problem, this problem, this problem, right? Day one. And so I'd say that the muscle that you need to work on is you can always educate yourself on bias. You can do the research, you can do all these things. But if you don't learn how to communicate that appropriately to your stakeholders, it's not going to translate. And say the real muscle you need to get at is learning how to set expectations in a way that helps people understand that you are an ally and you're doing this to help them get closer to their goals and not farther. And what that looks like, it's very contextual, it's very environmental, it's very or based on environment, and it's very cultural. And so I don't know how you get there in your day-to-day now, but that is the muscle you're building, right? That is the muscle you're building. Setting expectations very early and very often.
That's it. Yeah. And I mean, communication is everything. And that's something that grows with us in our careers. And I empathize from my early days staffing. Yes, yes, yes. Happy to please. And
Yeah.
it takes some maturity and it takes some experience. And honestly, it takes getting burned a few times to be like, you know what? I'm serving nobody, especially myself, when I'm not using my words, when I'm not speaking my mind. They hired me because of what I bring to the table. It's actually my responsibility to bring it to the table.
Your
And
responsibility to do that.
yeah,
And people will respect you more, right, Alison? People will look back and respect you more because you're serving the business
yep,
first and foremost. You're
yep,
serving the business.
yes. That's awesome. Well, we're running over time and it was my fault for getting you the wrong link. Sorry, everybody. Maybe we only have a few more minutes. Maybe we could wrap with like, what's one piece of advice that you would like to give to this group, or something that's really served you in your career in the talent space that you think would be helpful for others?
Yeah. I'd say I don't want to kind of beat it, but like become a subject matter expert, right? Become a domain expert. I'm right now taking a course on not necessarily technical recruiting, but like literally frameworks and development. I'm learning how, in a very layman terms, software development works. Like truly, I'm not teaching myself how to code. I don't think that's necessary, but I need to become a subject matter expert in what I'm doing. And I would say, if anything, to be a partner to the business, to get the respect that you deserve, to be able to move things quick, to become a subject matter expert. Don't be transactional, and that's gonna take time, which is fine. It should. I think if you have a North Star, right? You're something you could do over the next 3, 5, 10 years, and you don't need to do tomorrow, is keep learning how the business works, right? Be in those goal setting meetings, push your way into those KPI setting meetings, be in those quarterly goal setting meetings. Try to sit with the board, depending on where you're at. If you're ahead of people, if you're ahead of HR, right? Get close to the business by becoming a subject matter expert in that product industry market. And once you do that, everything else will start to fall into place. You'll write better job descriptions. You'll set better expectations because you know intimately what your stakeholders or hiring managers want. You'll be able to command respect more. You'll be able to write better email copy and not sound like every other recruiter recruiting Java developers, right? Everything will set into place once you know what you're talking about, in short. So don't be afraid to do the extra homework, extra credit, and learn what the company is doing inside and out.
Big time. Yeah. And then that bleeds into everything that we do, because we are sort of the spider in the web. That means we know what the hiring manager is talking about when they talk about certain products, and able to ask more questions, which then feed the job description, which then we
Exactly.
can help sell on the candidate, and then help
Exactly.
say, you said you wanted these things. This person's got all of that. And
Right. You're not
yeah,
going to get here because this is what this market looks like. I know the market. I know you're not going to get these jobs because this is what people are hiring for. I know this is a true DevOps role and not a system administration role. You're not going to be putting on networking and logging, fires all day, right? This is not right. You can speak contextually because you know now.
that's awesome. Great. Thank you. And Anthony, how can people find you if they want to stay in touch?
www. No. I'm on LinkedIn. I'll drop my LinkedIn now in the chat. But I'm Anthony Lewis. I don't think there are a lot of Anthony Lewis's, thankfully. But I'm on LinkedIn, and you can also find me at beacontalent.io. I'm writing it now.
Great.
Beacontalent.io. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a note. And I can, I love doing this, and I love connecting. I always say one-on-one is always the best value. I try to give the most value I can out of these, but these are just primers, right?
Wonderful. Yes. And thank you so much for sharing your perspective and experience with us, and especially the outcomes-based hiring stuff. I mean, we need to get a class made with you on all of this,
Absolutely.
because the market needs it. It's the future of hiring. I tell everybody about your perspective, and it is the future of hiring, outcomes-based hiring. That's how we're going to build a bigger tent and a more equitable recruiting process. So thank you for being kind of the lead voice in the market.
Thank you for
on
having
that.
Hit me up. I want to do this.
Yes. Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, Anthony Lewis, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to all of our attendees, and great questions, everyone. And then we'll share this to YouTube so you can share it with your network as well. So once again, I'm Alison Daly from Recruiting Innovation, and we're hosting you live from the Leadership Series with the Ernestine McClendon Talent Grant. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.